Hello again, everybody. Dr. Yates with you. We're continuing our discussion of the Christian Bible, in other words, the New Testament. This time I want to focus on the Gospels and just give you a brief overview about the Gospels. There are four Gospels, obviously: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what these Gospels do is to provide a biography of Jesus of Nazareth, really from four different perspectives and four different ways or witnesses of looking at Jesus. Each of these four Gospels narrate the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The Gospel of Mark, in the original text, ends with the empty tomb and has no account of the post-resurrection appearances. But the emptiness of the tomb implies, for Mark, a resurrection. So I find that rather interesting. Here in this chart you'll see that there's basically a target audience, a character of the author, a portrait of Jesus, and an emphasis for each of these four Gospels. And I think those are again, four unique perspectives of looking at Jesus's biography. Okay. Now, the word gospel derives from an Old English word, godspell, which means good news or glad tidings. So, what that really means is that the term Gospels was not being used in Judea at the time that these accounts were put down. It's a later addition, but we still call it the Gospels. Okay, the Gospels are considered, or the Gospel, I should say, is considered the good news of the coming kingdom of Messiah and the redemption through the life and death of Jesus. And that's the central message of Christianity. These Gospels were written between, again, approximately 70 AD and 100 AD, and they were the end products of a long process, very long process of development. All of these Gospels, all four of them, are anonymous, and almost certainly none of these Gospels are the work of eyewitnesses. Though tradition tells us they are, and tradition provides the names of the authors, but in reality, in historical reality, they are anonymous. And there was a very long, complex period of transmission of these Gospels. But eventually, just to kind of frame this for you, what we're saying here is that nothing was written down in a text until, at the very least, 70 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. What that means then is that everything that we know about Jesus of Nazareth was circulated among stories and the oral tradition for 70 years before somebody actually set them down in a text. Okay, that's like, for example, saying like the Korean War started 70 years ago, but no one wrote anything down about it or recorded it except by word of mouth until today. It's the same kind of principle. Okay, so when we're looking at the Gospels and the Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John, we've got to keep that frame of reference in mind, that what we're dealing with is a very, very complex form of transmission from oral tradition into written text. It didn't just happen the day of or the day after Jesus' crucifixion. Okay. Now, just to kind of spread this out a little bit more and make a connection with the Hebrew Bible, here you have the Old and New Testament manuscripts, and the Old Testament is in kind of a pinkish color, and the New Testament is in blue, and you can see how complicated and over, how long a period of time that this transmission took place. Again, for both the Old and New Testaments, none of the original manuscripts have survived. Okay, so what we have to work with are copies of copies of copies of copies of the original, or the original manuscripts. Starting in the late 2nd century, the 4 narrative accounts of the life and the work of Jesus Christ have been referred to as the Gospel of, or the Gospel according to, followed by the name of the supposed author. The first author to explicitly name the authorized Gospels is Irenaeus of Lyon, who promoted the 4 canonical Gospels. Whatever these early ascriptions to authors may imply about the sources behind the manuscripts or the perception of these Gospels, they are still anonymous compositions. Okay, like I said, tradition has it that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels. And tradition is an important thing, and it's necessary, I believe, to really understand what we have. But when we examine it from a scholarly and historical point of view, which we have to do, we find that ultimately the transmission process was long, complicated, and the authors of the manuscripts, we just don't know who they were. And that's, again, I want to emphasize, that's not taking anything away from the Gospels or the New Testament. It's just looking at and acknowledging the historical reality of how these came to be. Okay, so we have the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, Luke and John. The Gospel of Matthew is ascribed to the Apostle Matthew. This Gospel begins with a genealogy or a family tree of Jesus, and a story of his birth that includes a visit from the Magi and a flight into Egypt, and it ends with the commissioning of the disciples by the resurrected Jesus. The Gospel of Mark is ascribed to Mark the evangelist. This gospel begins with the preaching of John the Baptist and the baptism of Jesus. And really there are two different secondary endings that were added to or affixed to this gospel in the 2nd century. The original ending has the empty tomb, and that's it. It's a unique and vastly different portrait that we get from Mark than from Matthew. The next gospel is the Gospel of Luke, and it's ascribed to Luke the evangelist. And Luke the evangelist was not one of the 12 apostles, but was mentioned as a companion to the Apostle Paul, as well as being a physician. This gospel begins with parallel stories of the birth and childhood of John the Baptist and Jesus, and it ends with appearances of a resurrected Jesus and his ascension into heaven. The next gospel is the Gospel of John, and it's ascribed to John the evangelist. This gospel begins with a philosophical prologue. In fact, the first verse says, "In the beginning was the Word." And so it starts out very differently from the others, and was probably written long after the previous Gospels. And it ends with appearances made by the resurrected Jesus. Now, I want to introduce a new concept to you, because I think it's vitally important as we understand the Gospels, and indeed as we understand the New Testament. I want to introduce you to a term called the Synoptic Gospels. This term refers to the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all three contain similar accounts of the events in Jesus' life and his teaching, but they are independent of one another in terms of a literary independence. They weren't written at the same time. The Gospel of John is not considered one of the Synoptic Gospels because of a number of factors. It's structured very differently than these three Gospels. It includes stories of several miracles performed by Jesus and sayings spoken by Jesus that are not found in the Synoptic Gospels. And thus we can gather from that it was a later written gospel. But remember, the Synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay. Now, these four Gospels that eventually were included in the New Testament and were canonized were only a few among a multitude of early Christian Gospels. Okay. The existence of these Gospels and these texts really is even mentioned at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, in Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. Other early Christian Gospels, such as the, quote, Jewish Christian Gospels, unquote, or the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, also are important to consider and to investigate, because they also open up a window into the context of early Christianity. And they also provide, I think, some very, very much needed assistance in the reconstruction, if you will, of the historical Jesus. So, we'll conclude our discussion of the Gospels with that. I'm going to talk some more about the Synoptic Gospels in much more detail in another series of videos. But for now, we'll close this one down. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and I hope this helped. Go forth and pursue forward. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.